Poštovani gledatelji UNIDU televizije, također i slušatelji UNIDU radija, u još jednoj smo emisiji iz ciklusa Gost DU-CHECK. Bavimo se provjerom informacija, istražujemo i razgovaramo sa dragim ljudima iz svijeta i znanstvene zajednice, također i sa studentima, sa mnogobrojnim profesorima i kolegama novinarima. Današnji gost je Kristoffer Holt, ja ću govoriti na engleskome tako da bi mogli sa našim sugovornikom se približiti što više temi. Thank you for coming, and I'm very glad that we can have you as a guest here in Dubrovnik and in the University of Dubrovnik.
Thank you for having me here.
You have a big experience and a big knowledge in media, journalism, also political science, and we can speak about all the differences that are happening right now in the world. You are coming from Sweden, and we always look from the southeastern Europe to Scandinavia and to the middle of the Europe as a more, let's say, better places to live and to speak in a democratic way. So are we wrong? And are there differences that you can see when you are traveling, when you are speaking with your colleagues and all of the professors on the different universities?
Well, the Scandinavian case, both Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Norway, they are kind of special when it comes to the media because our populations, first thing, have a high trust in the news media, which is, according to me, one of the fundamental important things when it comes to the quality of democracy. If you have a functioning media and the people actually believe that the news are fair and balanced and that you can trust most of it, that's a good foundation for public discourse. It's based on trust. So that's one thing, and we also have the highest newspaper readership in the world. I think top three are Sweden, Finland, and Norway. And we also have a lot of newspapers and a long history and tradition of this culture, right? So that's the first thing. We also have very well-funded public service media institutions, who have a lot of resources. So that's also a kind of guarantee that even if you don't pay subscriptions to the big quality newspapers, you still get high quality journalism to your TV or through the radio. So that's, I think, makes our part of the world a little bit unique. If you talk with Hallin and Mancini and the different media systems, our part of the world stand out a little bit from other parts. On the other hand, we live in times where the media landscape is changing very quickly. It's becoming much more globalized. You have the social media, who's a platform or platforms that are not national in the same sense that the Swedish media system or the Scandinavian ones were built. So a lot of what's going on outside and the dynamics that drive public discourse in social media, is present also in the Scandinavian countries. And Andrew Chadwick talks about the hybridity of today's media landscape, which means that you have national media cultures blending with more international social media logics, which makes a lot of interesting things happen, right?
When we are speaking about the social media logics and how every person is some kind of journalist when we are posting on our own private profiles, how are you looking at that when all of those spaces in the middle started to overlap? And sometimes when I think about it as a normal person, not a professional in the knowledge base that you have, I can't see a big difference from the perspective of consumer. I think people are taking for granted everything that's on Facebook, on X, on Instagram, on whatever other platform people are posting. They're not trying to search so much, and at least here, when I speak with my friends, with family, with the people who are not introduced very much in a check of the media reliability. How you are looking on that?
Well, I mean, from the media research perspective, this has been discussed, since day one of social media. There's a famous quote by Jay Rosen, I think. He said that now, everything we do on social media is, accidental acts of journalism. Everyone is becoming more or less a journalist, and we participate in telling the news, sharing stories, even producing content, taking pictures, writing comments. That becomes part of the whole news ecosystem, right? So clearly, normal people have possibly a more active role in that sense. On the other hand, I did some research about what we call citizen journalism in Sweden back in 2010 and something like that. And that is a definition that takes normal citizens who take it upon themselves to share news about things that they think are important and do work, take pictures, write articles, inform other people about things. But we didn't find so much. That may be because there already is a saturation. If you want news, you know where to go, and you have the other channels ready. But what we see is the activity, and in order to get a story to end up on the agenda, right? It used to be the big media companies who could set the agenda for what we are discussing, but social media has opened up a sort of back door. So if something is trending, you can actually more or less force the big media companies to also talk about that, but it comes not from the editorial decisions that they've made, but just by becoming viral in some sense. So that has changed the power dynamics. The big companies are not so powerful as they used to be, but they're still kind of powerful, I would say. It's a little bit too early to say that they've lost their power, but now we were seeing, on a bigger global scale, that kind of challenge to the traditional mainstream big media, especially in America, for example. You see this dynamic going on, and Elon Musk's purchase of the platform X, or Twitter, and then he renamed it X, for example, is a deliberate attempt to challenge the old sort of fat cat media who used to run the show. And it's interesting because it is, I think, actually having an effect on the information that people are getting, right? I think perhaps X as a source of news was underestimated by many in the American election, for example. So I think what you're saying is that a lot of people, they just don't look further. They have their social media, news finds me.
It's enough for them, for normal consumer.
If I'm doing a study right now with young people in Sweden and interviewing them about how they find news. And one of the typical responses is that, well, news finds me, right? If anything happens, I will find out about it. Either someone will tell me, or I will just see it on social media feeds and so on. So it's a kind of reliance on both friends and colleagues, co-students, but also algorithms to kind of provide them with what they need. And that, I think, is a little bit of a shift. It's a more passive kind of attitude towards how you find your information and also value sources and so on. So there are some risks involved in that, of course. It opens up channels for malicious actors to introduce like disinformation and rumors and stuff like that, like you are very well aware of.
Yeah, no, sometimes I think that we should be scared a little bit about the algorithms and viral things that are coming in the first place. And from my perspective also, I'm trying always to find some more informations from those that are just targeting my profiles, because sometimes I can feel that I'm like some bell or in some kind of a balloon, and only informations that I like and I'm mostly putting hearts on the posts are coming more and more to me, and some other things that are really important are just missing from my whole horizon. But let's see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're doing when you're scrolling through social media and clicking on things is that you're training the algorithm based on your behavior. So you can actually affect it a little bit by deliberately clicking on different things, and then you'll see other things popping up in your flow later on.
And through this research, when you are speaking with the young students and young people in general, how they are reacting? Are they scared of that whole, let's say, how to say, like they are going just in one direction when they are relying on the algorithms and what somebody else will tell them? Do they have any opinions about that somebody else is creating their world?
Well, it seems to be like a double thing, right? So for the most part, they don't really seek out news and credible information. But when they hear that something has happened, I mean, that's the tricky question. Right? Where do you go to find credible, trustworthy information? And here I can actually see that, I mean, in the Swedish university system, but also in the lower schools, there is a lot of efforts into media and information literacy. So when they explain how they do to verify something that they hear, I mean, it's obvious that they have, okay, I usually go to the public service radio or TV or one of the big newspapers because I recognize the brand. And there is some kind of basic trust. So to them, it's not so worrying. They know, they kind of think they know at least how to verify information. Often they say that, okay, I come across something on social media that seems fishy. I don't click on it. I go out and I Google it instead. And then you see, okay, there are 3 other sources talking about the same thing, and they pick one of them that they trust. So they have, I think young people have strategies. You know, of course, heuristically, they have to develop strategies in order to navigate in this world. And of course, some people are more conscious, more aware, and others are not. But I think sometimes there is a tendency to underestimate young people also. And to just see them as complete victims of false information. You know, it's like the hypodermic needle theory of propaganda back in the days that, okay, it will always hit its mark, it will always kind of transform the minds of people's views. I think they're so saturated, the young people today, the amount of media they consume, that they're quite used to recognizing different kinds of you know, attempts to get, you know, clickbait, for example, is one thing that a lot of them comment on in my interviews. So that's one thing that they're very irritated with. Okay, you click on it and then the article is not really, you know, matching the headline and so on. But of course, I mean, we shouldn't underestimate either the risk that, and I think especially when it comes to opinion building and political, you know, attempts to politically affect people, I think the risk here is that you can identify special subgroups within, especially young people, but you know, it goes for all generations. Where you can sort of tap in and nudge them in certain directions and you know, slowly open up more radical kind of type of content for them. I wouldn't say that this goes for the majority, but for certain groups I think that there is a risk to sort of open up a window to these kind of corrosive kind of content.
When we are talking about the risks and making the public opinion, you spoke about the Elon Musk and X and political elections that happened in America a while ago. And are we in a part of the timeline when there is the idea of one person holding a lot in one position of the power, like Elon Musk can buy one company and then put the whole agenda there, or I spoke a little while ago here on the same DU-CHECK podcast with another colleague, and we touched a little bit the podcast culture and Joe Rogan and the people who are also very involved in the political elections in America. How those positions of power of one person is shaking dirt of the media today.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand that being able to describe reality is always connected to having power, right? The one who gets to say how things are also gets to say what are the problems and how should we fix them. So there's an enormous amount of influence in having access to the powerful channels into people's minds, right? To tell others about how the world is. So naturally, there will always be a struggle for hegemony, to get access to those channels. But what we're seeing today is a shift from, it used to be connected to, the big TV networks. They had channels into every family's home, right? People were watching TV, cable TV, and the newspapers, and so on. They were owned by big companies, few actors, where power was concentrated, and they could pretty much set the agenda and choose what parts of reality to describe and also how to describe it. What we're seeing now is that there are many different kinds of challenges to that concentration of power. People want to get in on the action. They want also to be able to describe reality, but in ways that serve their purposes. So, it's not surprising. It's always going to be like that, and there's always going to be someone who, is on top of the pyramid and manages to kick the others down, but they will try to crawl back up and pull. So, it's a constant dynamic of changing. Who is in power, right? So that's what we're seeing now. The technology, the development of social media platforms, and the connection to the ownership here is a key element, right? If you listen to what Elon Musk says, his specific purpose of buying X was that he thought that, okay, the people who own the channel into people's minds, they are in a specific ideological kind of favor, right? And they're censoring people who think otherwise. So that's what he's saying. He's buying it in order to prevent censoring of certain voices. So. And that's we can talk a lot about that statement in another podcast, because it's a quite central one. But basically what he's doing is declaring his intent to shift the power balance. By he has the money, he can buy that power, and now he's using it for that purpose. But there are also others who are doing this. Everyone who owns these channels will try to hold on to that power, and there will always be kind of interests and so connected to that.
I want to ask you something about, it's a little bit different topic, but I think it's also important on the media perspective. During the pandemic here in Croatia, we had like the whole situation on the earth level, but Sweden was in one part on the big media impact here, how you are fighting the whole thing. And then another topic that is also in my mind is about the immigration that is happening in Sweden. And sometimes we get different, saturated information that it's happening a lot or it's not happening and it's a fake one. How are the things there? It's your country and you know the real picture.
It's a good paradoxical example, but it illustrates the whole thing. Describing reality in Sweden is connected to your own interests. So Sweden has become, the image of Sweden has become a bat that you hit people with in the political debate in other countries, right? So first you had the immigration, crisis. So some politicians in some countries, they were using Sweden as the bad example. Don't do like Sweden, it will just become chaos, and look what happened there, right? But then Corona hit, and we handled the situation a little bit, or quite a lot differently than other countries. And then you could paradoxically see the same actors who were using Sweden as the bad example, all of a sudden using Sweden as the good example, right? So that kind of illustrates a little bit. So people describe Sweden and the image of Sweden and reality in Sweden according to their own purposes for winning, political battles in their own countries. But it's an interesting phenomenon, I think. Because it shows how selective it is, right? During the refugee crisis, you would have journalists coming from other countries, seeking out the specific areas where there were problems and only showing that. And then you would have other journalists who were more in favor of a generous immigration policy. They would just go to the nice parts and say, "Oh, look, everything is fine." And so it always depends on what you're trying to sell a little bit.
The whole picture is complex on many levels. We have a few more minutes, and I'm really happy that I had a chance to ask you a little bit about this. And I know it's a short time to put all the questions and answers in one 25 minutes show, but still you're in contact with a lot of the people from the southeastern part of Europe, and we started the whole show with that question, the differences. What do you think in the future? Will it be like very similar from country to country, at least in the European Union, for Croatia and Sweden? Some other parts that we spoke about, would it be like the same direction with the overgrowth of media and social networks, or it will still be different from part to part as we are seeing?
Well, I think media use and the way that people use media is always intricately connected to culture, right? It reflects our culture in some sense. And I think the Scandinavian countries are quite different culturally from a lot of countries around here. And I think, if you look at how people use social media, for example, of course there are some universal things. You can connect to family and friends and so on. You can look for information in different ways and so. So that's, the universal features will be, of course, similar. It shows that the possibilities embedded in the technology itself kind of shapes our behavior to some extent. But I think the cultural elements will still be there. In our culture, for example, in Sweden, we have a high trust in the authorities. And for example, when a crisis happens, we kind of look to the authoritative channels. We would turn on the radio and see if we can get some information, and we would listen to that. Where I think in many other countries, in Southern Europe, for example, the trust in the authorities and in the media institutions is not that high. So maybe, they would behave a little bit differently. I think those things will not probably go away in any time soon, so to speak.
We will see what the future will bring to us. We are at the end of the show. I want to thank you, Kristoffer, for being here, and I hope you will enjoy your time in Dubrovnik a little bit more. So thank you once again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Poštovani gledatelji UNIDU televizije, također i slušatelji UNIDU radija, profesor Kristoffer Holt iz Švedske je bio naš današnji gost. Svakako u narednim emisijama družimo se sa mnogobrojnim drugim znanstvenicima, profesorima, studentima, novinarima iz polja medija, odnosa s javnošću, politologije, političke komunikacije, tako čuti ćemo još puno zanimljivih tema u ciklusu Do-CHECK.